Hello and welcome to my channel. Well, this video is a little bit easier to make because I have less of them, and that's, if you can tell from the description, it's basically my EDC or everyday carry type of knives from the early 60s, 1960s, to I would say the early to mid 90s. And the reason why there's not a lot of them is, first of all, I'm fortunate to even have some after that length of time. But as I've described before, this is my very first knife that I bought for like $5. It's a Saber made in Japan, bone handle. Later on they went to plastic. Nothing special, basically a pocket knife, pen knife. It had a pin blade on it, and a main blade. And I usually had this in my pocket and was carrying it around when I was a teenager. Yeah, we carried it in high school and stuff like that. No, I didn't ever get into any knife fights. It's not the object. And then occasionally, I would, when my dad got back from Vietnam, because this is 1964, I would use this one, basically, the military service knife, like a camp knife, basically equivalent to a Victorinox of some kind. But because this was my dad's, only later on in life did I actually, get this. Alright, so there's a big gap because once I got into high school, after I got out of high school, I went into the military. And so this is what I had, a buck 110. And this lasted not only for while I was in the military, for like 5 or 10 years after I got out, I was still carrying this. I made my own pouch because the Air Force was kind of freaky about us having non-standard gear or whatever. And so I made my own pouch so I could actually carry it and have it with me. And it's just a regular old buck 110. This is a 4-star. I had the one before that, but I gave that one to the ex-wife. That was probably the one that I was carrying the most. She had one basically identical to mine, and then when the split up came, I just picked up, here, you can have that one, you can have this one. I didn't, really care one way or another which way, but I still use this one a lot in the 80s and stuff. Alright, now, as you know, buck 110 is heavy, and these other knives, now that very first knife I had, the Saber, it was a long time before I got this one back. It was in the mid-80s eventually, or after my father died, when I finally got this particular knife back. It was in my mom's possession. So, as you can see, there wasn't a whole lot. Now, I added some fixed blades in here because I did carry, Warthog gave me the sheath and the boot knife that came with it. But while I was in the military, I bought an A.G. Russell Sting, and I carried this one a lot. 1977 model. I didn't have the sheath. I built my own sheath. This is the sheath that I made for it. Carried a lot. Back then, a fixed blade knife for me was for defensive purposes, and usually defensive purposes meant double edge, because I didn't want to have to consider which way I was trying to slice with the knife. Either edge would cut. Sometimes it would be a longer boot knife. These are also usually considered extra laws against them because they're double edged and they're stiletto and everything else. That adds to uh, not necessarily the effectiveness, but if you ever had to intimidate, someone with, hey, don't do this, or you're going to get hurt. It has some of that. You just don't rely on that if you ever. You have to be prepared to use it if you pull it. And then this one is kind of like a dagger. It's a hollow grind, but it's only sharp on one edge. It has a false edge, and this is not the Ninja by Benchmark. I got that one. I had a little shoulder rig with it and all that other stuff. And this is the original sheath that it came with. The retention is, this little. You do have to put it in one way or another, and I usually get it wrong. But as you can see, that's kind of like one of the drawbacks to it is, if a knife isn't easy to return to its sheath, that can be a pain in the butt trying to put it away. But anyways, those were that, all right. And then I started looking for something less heavy than a buck, easier to carry, and had a pocket clip. Now before that, I was carrying these Gerbers. They're nice. They had a whole series in line. Now this is a Ridge Runner. It's kind of like a copy of it, as you can see. And I would carry this guy also, but again, the only issue I had with it is the pocket clip. All right, that it didn't have a pocket clip, so I would put it in there, and I found that I really liked the pocket clip. So this was my main carry after the Buck 110 for the most time, for the longest time, for the very longest time. I would use this, and I still used it up until I retired, because the serrated blade I had grown out of after a while, but it comes in very handy for cutting banding cord, the plastic or fiberglass reinforced banding cord. You can basically saw through it, and you still have a cutting edge up here that you can do stuff with. So that's that. And then there were a lot of really, like you could consider junk knives or crazy. Now, this is in my last job. This is what I carried. Again, I like the serrated ability, and I didn't care about what the blade steel was as long as it cut. It's 440 stainless. And this is an assisted opening one. So, a lot of this stuff I'm not into anymore. But when I worked and when I carried knives around and stuff, I used them. And, I admit it. Here's one that was also assisted, flipper and assisted opening, that always people were complimenting me. Oh, that's a nice looking knife. I tried to use it as a screwdriver. I knew better when I was doing it. I said, oh man. Let's look at the grain structure here when it snapped. So yeah, fairly consistent grain structure, but what I was doing was, using it like a screwdriver, which is why you don't want to do that. Now I could reprofile it and, make it a usable, shorten it down and make it. I leave this here to remind me of my stupidity. And this one I like so much. I think it was like $5 or $10. I got another one. It even has like a little bottle opener thing on there. Wow. Here's another one I had while I was working at Ratco. It has a bottle opener built into the blade. Thumb studs, partially serrated once again. Longer, pointier, stabbier type of setup here. There was a flashlight that fit in here. A ferro rod that fit in this end. I stole the ferro rod. Seat belt cutter. window glass breakers, like aluminum handles and stuff. A liner lock. Again, it's another one of those type of knives that you carry around with you. You can use if you lose it, or if you have to break out of your vehicle. It might come in handy, you know. But as far as like showing off one of your collections, probably a lot of people wouldn't show that or admit they had one. Here's another. There was a lot of just no-name cheap knives I would buy. This one's like a kind of a serrated tanto shaped Jaguar. The hair was optional, came in extra. One-sided pocket clip, you know. But what was kind of neat about this was how they released the liner lock. That's pretty cool, isn't it? You know, it kind of blends in. It doesn't look like anything, you know. But it's still a liner lock. You just don't. You can have a hard time like, how do I close this thing? Sometimes I keep knives just for that, just for a different way of closing. All right. So, you know, I like Smith & Wesson firearms. I don't like most Smith & Wesson knives. This one's okay. Again, I was with the serrated because I found the usefulness of it in my line of work. Liner lock. It's not too bad. You know, I mean, it's okay. This one is a Gerber, and it reminded me here why, you know, it was supposed to be an automatic one and everything, and it basically just flew apart. And that's when I realized that Gerber is not the same Gerber I used to know. It changed, and I hadn't been following it, but, you know, part of the little spring mechanism or whatever makes it flip blew up or messed up. And it wasn't long after I got the knife, and I didn't spend a whole lot of money. I mean, I think like $15 or something. I didn't spend a whole lot of money for it, but I was very disappointed. So the good thing about the Easy Out that I was using was, at the time, it was considered a super steel. I don't know where I put it now. Well, there it is. ATS 34 Easy Out. They made a lot of different ones. They made the Parabellum. They made some, you know, other ones. Sorry, I'm trying not to bump that. But that's basically, those are basically it. Those are my pocket knives that I carried every day, and the fixed blades. And yeah, it's not an extensive list, but until I really started getting back into knives and everything, these did pretty much what I needed to do for a pocket knife. I mean, I didn't have a large, I had more knives and stuff, but I just didn't carry or use a lot of knives, really. I had workhorses that I would have with me all the time, and I used them. Now, later on, I got into Leatherman, and I have, you know, I have one that was gifted back to me by Chris, but I mean, I had a Leatherman Wave that I used a lot, and it had a knife in it. It had the serrated blade if you just want to play serrated, and it had the straight, and I think that was a better option. I like that, and then the pliers and the tools. So a lot of times, that would be the only knife I was carrying. Just the Leatherman. But like I said, most of the time I would usually have at least one other knife. So, yeah, it wasn't an extensive list, but there you go. That's my EDC for a few decades, and it changed only fairly recently. I mean, you know, within the last 10, 20 years or so. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.